Hey, welcome back. Today we'll be covering variables, functions, and logic objects. Starting off with variables. Variables are objects used to store or hold information. This information could be a number, a text, a list of things, or anything really. Every variable is assigned a name that we can look up at any point in our macro. You are free to call it whatever you like, provided that you start each name with a letter or underscore. Variables are assigned with values of data types. A data type is basically the kind of information or value a variable can be assigned with. There are a lot of them, but most of them can only be accessed through scripting. So we'll only focus on the basic ones we can use. The three basic data types you should know are numbers, string, and Boolean. Numbers include both whole numbers and decimal numbers. A string is basically a text, a sequence of characters. And a Boolean is a data type with only two states, true or false. Also, a variable's value can be modified at any point in the macro, even with a different value of another data type. One advantage of using variables is that the value of a variable can be passed into any option in Macrorify that accepts values of that data type. An example is controlling the coordinates of click points with variables. You should also note that some data types can be used with some of the arithmetic operators. One use case is with numbers. Strings can also be used with the plus operator to combine multiple text together. It can also be added with some data types, like numbers. So here's how you create variables in Macrorify. You tap on the Variable tab. Then you select the Variable button at the bottom to add a variable. We then see some options we can modify. The identifier is simply the name we want to associate the variable with. And the value is the value we want to assign to the variable. The drop-down menu lets us specify what kind of value or data type we want to pass to the variable. By default, we can only use numbers and strings. To use any other data type, we use the reference option. This option is mostly used with scripting, but we can use it to pass Boolean values. We'll go ahead and give it a name, and then set its value to true. If we ever decide to change the value of any of our variables, we can do so with the Set Variable action. Here we select our variable, and then assign it with a new value. Next, we'll look at functions. Functions are simply tasks that carry out a certain purpose or activity. They are a little bit like groups, but can be defined once and be carried out at multiple places in our macro. They also let us pass values and variables to them in the form of parameters to further modify the behavior of the function. Parameters are like mini variables that are only accessible within that function and can be used anywhere in the function. Whenever we pass a value or variable to a function, these parameters are assigned with these values, which are further used somewhere in the function. Also, functions are allowed to return a value, usually at the end of the function, but can be anywhere really. Returning a function also ends a function call instantly. The value being returned by the function can be passed into anywhere in the macro. It could be passed into options, or it could be assigned to variables. Here's an example of a function. It takes in two values from its parameters and returns their product. The return value can then be passed into options or other variables. Parameters can also be given default values, in the case where no value was passed during the function call. In a situation whereby there were no values passed to the parameters, and there are no default values, the parameters will take a new value, known as null. Null is another data type usually assigned to undefined variables. They can cause a lot of problems and errors, so be sure to avoid them. Functions generally look like this. The parameters are placed between the brackets, and the content or body of the function is between the curly braces. The body in our case are the objects and actions we include into the function. Also, the naming of functions also follow the same rule as variables. Functions can also call other functions within them, provided that the other functions had been defined beforehand. Let's say we have these functions defined in this order. The first function cannot call the other functions because they haven't been defined at that point in time. The second function can only call the first function and not the third. And the third function can call both the first and the second function. Here's how to actually use functions in Macrorify. First, you open the Functions tab. You create a function by tapping the Add Function button at the bottom. By tapping Edit, we can name and add parameters to the function. You can add as many parameters as you want and give default values where necessary. Here, you can add objects and actions with the plus icon. To call a function, you use the call function action. You then select any of your functions and add values to be passed to the parameters. You should note that the values are passed consecutively to the parameters. And finally, we'll look at if-else conditions. Basically, this is how an if condition works. If the condition is true, it does something. Else it does something else. So the condition evaluates to a Boolean value. A condition is usually used with a conditional operator. And they are the equals to operator, the not equals to operator, the greater than operator, the less than operator, the greater than or equals to operator, and the less than or equals to operator. In Macrorify, these four operators are used with numbers, while these two can be used with any other data type. Here are some examples of expressing conditions. Also, variables and the return value of functions can also be used with the conditional operators. Here's how an if condition looks like, with the condition being within the brackets and the body between the curly braces. The body in our case will be the actions and objects we pass into it. Conditions can be combined together with the and or statements. Let's look at an expression with the and statement. This expression can only be true if condition 1, 2, and 3 are true. Now let's look at an expression with the or statement. The expression is true if any one of the conditions is true. Now let's look at an expression with both the and or statement. The expression can be seen as though all the AND conditions in series are combined together. Taking it step by step, condition expressions are evaluated from left to right. Starting with the first two combined conditions. If condition 1 and 2 are evaluated to be true, then the whole expression will be evaluated to be true while skipping the remaining conditions. If they evaluate to be false, it moves on to the next condition for evaluation. If condition 3 and 4 is true, then the whole expression will be evaluated to be true, skipping the remaining conditions. If they are false, it moves on to the next condition for evaluation. And finally, if condition 5 is true, then the whole expression is evaluated to be true. If it is false, then the whole expression is false. An easier way to avoid getting confused is to use brackets to separate the and or statement. Now let's look at actually using it in Macrorify. To add an if-else conditional object, you use the plus icon. The Condition tab is where you put all your conditions. On the OnTrue tab, the objects and actions here will be carried out if the condition evaluates to be true. If the condition is false, then the actions on the OnFalse tab will be carried out. Using the simple option, we add in conditions with the plus icon. With the Advance option, we type in the condition manually through scripting. Upon pressing the plus button, you'll be presented with how you want to set up the condition. This part lets you choose a source for the comparison. This lets you choose the operator, or the type of comparison to use. And this lets you put in a value you want to compare the source to. For the source, you can pick from any of these options. This selects from any of your variables. This selects values from your setting builder, your macro settings dialog. This lets you call a function and use the return value as the source. If we were inside a function, this lets you select any of the function's parameters as the source. The Custom option lets you type in the condition through scripting. The Detection option can only be used inside a multi-detection object. You use the result of any of the detection as a source. Upon selecting the variable option, you can select any of your variables. We choose an operator and put a value to compare with. There are now 2 plus buttons. The first button continues to add upon the first set of conditions, while the second button adds a separator for the next set of conditions. If we wanted to use the Advance option and enter the conditions manually, it would look like this. You might mostly be using the simple option, as it has a lot of easy-to-use comparison methods for the different source types. Great! You were able to make it to the end of the video. I hope you were able to learn something. Make sure to stick around, as we will be covering a lot more in our next videos.